Thank you, Audrey. That was beautiful. So there are many euphemisms for the word death, and the title of today's service is Go Gentle into That Good Night, which is a euphemism, a famous one from Dylan Thomas's poem. Fear has a tendency to constrict us, and fear of death can be one of the hardest ones to manage. It leads some to use drugs or other means of avoiding reality. Others think if only they amass enough wealth and or power, they will somehow become immortal, or at least be remembered forever. But fear drains us of energy. If we could do away with the fear of death, what could we do with that energy? I believe we could focus on our life now, paying more attention to what matters to us, or discovering that anew. So you may think that the medical profession will help you address questions of mortality. You might want to know your prognosis after a life-limiting illness diagnosis, or talk through the options and enroll in hospice care at an early enough juncture when it would actually make a difference. My experience as an end-of-life educator has been that it's often up to the patient and their loved ones to initiate those conversations. My daughter Claire is in medical school and says they barely made a mention of gerontology, much less how to be with someone facing the reality of their mortality for the first time. So how can we approach this topic that admittedly few of us want to really deal with? So one avenue to reducing fear of death is to consider our views on afterlife, not just for ourselves, but in conversation with others. So I'm going to outline the 4 main beliefs about afterlife and why we shouldn't fear death. And this is adapted from Kelvin Chin's book, Overcoming the Fear of Death. As I describe them, please consider where you fit in. And if you're a mix of more than one, that, of course, is allowed. So the first belief system is, there's nothing else. This existence is all there is. When my body dies, my mind, soul, spirit, consciousness, awareness, I'm just going to use mind today, shuts off. Humanists subscribe to this way of thinking, as do people of the Jewish faith. From a Lancet article, humanism is a positive creed that asserts, first, that the moral life is desirable in itself, and second, that because there is no supernatural source of moral values, it is up to people to identify these principles and abide by them. As related to end-of-life care, individuals have the right to make their own decisions, and those are not informed by any spiritual traditions, but they do actually reject the supernatural. So, no need to fear death here, because there is nothing that survives death, and thus no experience to be anxious about. Problem solved. Second belief system, there's something afterwards, and part of me continues, and I'm afraid or worried about that experience. This might be the evangelical point of view, where we're likely to go to hell unless we follow this person or live this way according to certain rules. There's a possibility of something good, but it's not guaranteed. People in the just plain unsure can be in this camp, and it can be hard to get out of the fear cycle. One way that Chin suggests approaching this fear of continued existence is to develop meta-awareness of our thoughts and work towards inner stability, which then leads to self-confidence. That one takes a little more time to develop, you might say. Or you can look up near-death experiences on YouTube and hear some pretty incredible and uplifting stories. Number 3, when my body stops working, my mind, whatever, is still present in some way, and I'm not fearful about that experience. I won't be in human form, and I'm okay with whatever that new form takes. I won't be on planet Earth, but rather in a non-physical state. So the needs of our physical bodies disappear. All those aches and pains gone. There may not be a fear for a variety of reasons: strong inner sense of self, a deep self-confidence, a near-death experience, or strong religious or spiritual beliefs that you'll be taken care of after physical death. Think universalists. And then there's the possibility of reincarnation, where the soul continues and has the choice to return in a different body. In this scenario, we've had past lives and we'll have future lives. And in the Buddhist tradition, The goal is to reach enlightenment and not have to experience being human again. Other traditions, such as the Celts, extended reincarnation to non-human existences, such as rocks or animals. There's logically little to no fear of the afterlife here, but with all of these belief systems, it's the actual process of dying that we'd like to minimize or avoid, not what comes after that death. As Woody Allen famously said, "I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want to be there." You may fit neatly into one of these categories, you may combine them, you may not be sure. You may think one way, you can change your mind. We can't really know 100% what happens after death. But by understanding the full range of ideas out there, we can approach conversations with others with greater acceptance and respect. What does it come down to? Either we'll continue to exist or we will cease to exist. I dedicate the lighting of our chalice today to being fully in the moment here with you all and feeling grateful that our paths have crossed. Please join me in reciting our affirmation as printed in your order of service. As we come together to worship, we remind ourselves to treat all people kindly because we are one family, to take good care of the earth because it is our home, and live lives full of love and goodness because that is how we will all become the best that we can be. All right, we're getting in the Halloween mood here. A little yoga, anybody? One way that we can deal with our fear, talk about death, is to have fun with it. And so in my travels as a peace of mind guide and end-of-life educator, I came across this game called the Death Deck. Anybody here heard of this? Played it? No? All right, great. We had a wonderful gathering at the Cider House on Thursday last week, had 25 people there. We just gathered and talked for a few minutes, and then we sat down and started answering these questions, and lots of great discussion comes out of this. So I'm going to read a question, and then there are 3 answers. So just raise your hand, and then I hope this discussion will continue at coffee hour. So, in your final days, would you pray or meditate? A, full throttle prayer. Anyone for full throttle prayer? No prayers, all right? How about massive mindful meditation? A few massive mindful meditators, okay. C, let's just see what's on TV. Okay. These are for those who believe in reincarnation, but play along if that's not your stick. Choose a reincarnation challenge for your next self. Would you rather come back? I'll read all 3 of these, and then we'll go back and do A, B, C. So would you rather come back, A, super rich, but die well before my prime? B, super poor, but live a long, healthy life? C, paralyzed, but be guaranteed a Nobel Peace Prize? So A, super rich, but die well before my prime. I would go for that one, yeah. Super poor, but live a long, healthy life. Got some of those, right? And paralyzed but be guaranteed a Nobel Peace Prize. All right, we've got somebody going for the gold. Oh yes, you can definitely say none of the above. Yeah, thanks. Okay, two more. Signs from beyond the grave. Signs from beyond the grave are a comforting validation that souls live on. I would say that. Oh, you want me to read all of them? Okay. A comforting validation that souls live on. B, probably just a coincidence. I think, maybe. C, not real. Once you're gone, there's no way to phone home. All right, A, comforting validation that souls live on. Got some believers in that, okay. Probably just a coincidence. I think, maybe. Okay. And C, not real. Once you're gone, you're gone. All right, we got some humanists here. All right. All right, and then this one I'm just going to ask a couple people. So ask the question and then think about it for a minute and raise your hand if you would like to share. And I'll tell you something from the event last week that's really funny. So lucky you. You get to relive one day in your life before you die. You get to relive one day in your life before you die. Which one would it be? Yes. The day you got both of your cats. What are their names? Sparrow and Frankie. That is fantastic. Yes, that is a memorable day.
My first hole-in-one.
Your first hole-in-one. That's a celebration for sure. Yeah, yeah. One more person? What day would you relive?
My older daughter's wedding. Forget all the work, enjoy the moment.
Yes, yes, great. Well, that ties right into what happened at the event. I was at a table with all women, and we were answering this, and the births of the first baby, et cetera, et cetera. And so I said, well, nobody's mentioned their own wedding day. And all of us said, no way would we relive that day. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. That was a most marvelous beginning. I really feel as if I could just go home now. But I'll soldier on. I want to say that because I have been a part of Cedars for 20 years, I've suffered a great deal of sorrow and grief. No, it's not your fault. It's because of all the people that I cared about and because of all the people I loved. And this is my family. And the lesson I've learned from that is that if you love, then you will suffer grief. And that's just the way it is. That's the human condition. But I wouldn't have it any other way, because I am so grateful for this community. I have more reason probably than any of you to be grateful for this community and the way it has supported me.
Now it's the time in our service where we invite you to come forward, share a joy or a sorrow that you would like to be held in community. This part of the service is neither live streamed nor recorded, so feel free to share what's in your heart. Please come up and say your name and a sentence or two, and we will share in the Middle East and Ukraine and other parts of the world where death is happening on a regular basis. And some water for the hope that there will be a solution. Thank you. I'm going off script a little bit here. Alan mentioned so many of our beloveds who are no longer here with us in body, and just ask that we take a moment, and if you haven't not been here a long time and want to bring somebody else into this space, let's just take a moment and say their names out loud. Faith, John, Diana, so we can be serious, and we can also be a little bit lighter about death. So I'm going to offer some jokes while you reach for your wallet. If this is your first time here, your presence is a gift, and please feel free to let the basket pass you by. We look forward to getting to know you a bit after the coffee at service hour. All right, here goes. Will glass coffins be a success? Remains to be seen. Smallpox, the Spanish flu, and the Black Death have already done the whole global pandemic thing. What COVID is doing is just plagiarism. A man walks into a magic forest and tries to cut down a talking tree. "You can't cut me down," the tree complains. "I'm a talking tree." The man responds, "You may be a talking tree, but you will dialogue." Okay, yeah. Okay, enough. Will the ushers please collect the offering? That was kind of a spooky song. Thank you so much for your gifts.
Well, I almost feel like I should give a trigger warning for what I'm about to say. It's not all optimistic. I had originally titled my talk today, A Short History of Death, which you're actually going to get, but that's only half of it. And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought a better title would be a riff on Dylan Thomas's poem. I won't read the whole poem, but the lines that are specifically significant are, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage at the dying of the light." And I pondered that poem for many years. And I could never figure out why somebody who was raging so much would think the night was so good. It just didn't make any sense. And obviously it made sense to the poet, and I have reason to believe that I don't always understand poetry, but this is only just the thing that got me started. How can that be a good night? And that really is what the second half of what I want to say today is about. Why not go gentle? And why is the night good, or is the night good? Well, one thing is certain, wrote Benjamin Franklin. Two things are certain: death and taxes. And death necessarily must be the older by far, as it seems that humans, once they had achieved a degree of self-consciousness and developed language, must have known that they would one day die. Further, early humans must have been intimately acquainted with death. Not only did they live largely by killing other animals for food, but they were witnesses to death of fellow humans by disease, accident, and by violence at the hands of other humans, far more frequently than we are, though the television is doing its best to remedy that, of course. It is a curious thing that there's good evidence from archaeology, from burials from many tens of thousands of years ago, that human beings have, for a very long time, had some sense that there may be some sort of post-mortem existence. Archaeology is a tricky business, interpreting bones and stones and so on. But it's the burial practices of burying people with jewelry and other things involving wealth or tools that were involved, that they were involved with, suggests that there was some notion that there might be some kind of life that went on afterwards. And it is doubly curious that our own heritage, as inheritors of largely a European civilization, European culture, begins in the Middle East, where in fact there was no notion of post-mortem existence. The earliest story that exists on any subject is a story about the problem of death, and that is the Gilgamesh story. Probably 4,000 years old or so. And it's a story of King Gilgamesh, king of Uruk in Mesopotamia, what is now largely Iraq. And it presents not just death, but death as the problem. Here, death is not just something that happens, something unacceptable, something to be solved, but it's fixed. It's something to overcome, something that apparently can't be overcome. It becomes a problem, as I suspect it does for many of us, when it becomes personal. King Gilgamesh watches as his best friend suddenly dies in the prime of life. In its description of his grief, the understanding of death and its aftermath are presented to us. The dead spend eternity as shadows in darkness, without consciousness, eating mud. This assessment is echoed in the 3rd chapter of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. For dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Something that is stated in many funeral services in the Christian tradition. Gilgamesh is a man of action, however, and he sets off chasing a rumor that there exists a mysterious plant, the eating of which confers immortality. After many adventures, he has the plant in his hands, only to lose it again. It is gone forever, carried off by a serpent. Can it be the very same serpent that brings death to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? If so, death remains an insoluble problem for the Israelites until about the beginning of the 2nd century BCE, when, with the book of Daniel, apocalyptic ideas appear in the Hebrew Bible for the first time. For the first time, the possibility and the hope of immortality become a possible future for many. This is the prediction of the resurrection of the body that will accompany God's final assertion of sovereignty over his creation. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, evil will be destroyed, the dead will rise from their graves. In that last judgment, the righteous will dwell forever in God's kingdom here on earth. The unrighteous will be utterly destroyed. Sound familiar? This is the view that was current in the days of Jesus of Nazareth and John the Baptist. It was also the view widely held among the popular party of Pharisees. What John and Jesus added was a sense of imminence, of urgency. It was going to happen soon, at any moment. And the only way to get into that kingdom was to repent of your sins, that is, to become righteous. You must cast off your Christian blinders here if you are to understand this view properly. The Jews of Jesus' day did not believe in a soul that could be separated from the body. Life was one, hence the resurrection of the body. There is no spiritual realm where a bodiless soul could dwell, and necessarily there was no spiritual heaven or spiritual hell where souls could spend eternity either in bliss or in torment. That came later. Now we must turn to the Greeks, who eventually did have a strong belief in soul-body dualism. Not originally, because we know from the Iliad that the notion of Hades was virtually identical with what we get from Babylon and from Gilgamesh. It was a place of unconsciousness and eating dust. But along comes Plato and later Greek thought. He even believed in reincarnation, where at death a soul simply took off one garment, that is the body, and put on another. This, of course, is the view of the famous passage in the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture, where it is about the metaphor is presented as simply taking off one suit of clothes and putting on another, so that one should not grieve, is the lesson for the dead. There were also the Gnostics in Greece, in the Greek culture, many of whom claimed that Jesus was a special soul sent down to earth to rescue other souls lost in the world of matter. When the early followers of Jesus became mostly Greek-speaking, non-Jews, largely through the preaching of St. Paul, the Greeks' idea of the soul entered the picture of nascent Christianity. Eventually, when the hoped-for return of Jesus after the crucifixion was delayed and delayed and delayed, this Greek notion was overlaid on the earlier Jewish apocalyptic view. The kingdom of God was translated to a heavenly spiritual realm, and by a necessary symmetry, hell also came to be seen as a place not merely of death, but of eternal punishment of deathless souls. One can see a vestige of the old apocalyptic view in that most Greek of the four Gospels, the latest Gospel, the most theologically developed Gospel, the Gospel of John. And perhaps the most famous verse in that book, John 3:16, we have, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Notice something that is hard for a person of faith today to notice. The alternatives are life and death, not heaven and hell. That is life in the earthly kingdom, or annihilation, that is permanent death. For the unrighteous, that is, the unbelievers, there is nothing but darkness and dust or mud. For them, we are back in the world of Gilgamesh. This, I believe, is what Jesus actually taught. We have this development, I think, historically generated by the fact that the kingdom did not come. Translation, as my favorite New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman says, from a horizontal cosmology of life in this world or death in the grave, permanent death in the grave, to a vertical cosmology, as you have heaven and you have hell. It becomes spiritualized, non-physical, and becomes a destiny for now immortal immortal soul. So if the soul is indeed immortal, the good guys go to heaven, but you have to have some place to put the bad guys because it's immortal. And so you have to me, the obscenity of eternal punishment. Human beings are not capable of infinite evil, and therefore no justice can be served by infinite punishment. Well, I digress. Well, Christianity moves along. The Catholic Church, which in the West was the only church, of course, for many centuries, carries on, trying to frighten people into virtue by the threat of hell. And on the way, they invent purgatory as heaven's vestibule, a place where souls not quite awful enough to merit hell, but not quite good enough to deserve heaven, can spend countless years in discomfort, consoled only by the thought that purgatory is not forever. The Reformation does away with purgatory, but all else remains in place. If anything, hell becomes even more immediate. The boundary between it and this life becomes thinner. The fundamentalist formula is have a conversion experience and believe in Jesus, that is, get saved, or suffer forever in hell. Well, if purgatory is the vestibule of heaven, then the Renaissance is the vestibule of the Enlightenment. After the recovery of classical culture by the humanists of Italy, the skepticism of the French philosophers came into play. About the same time, Copernicus and Galileo and Newton set in motion the scientific revolution. Notice that all three of these giants of the scientific revolution continued to harbor a hope of heaven. Later scientists, not so much. When I was in graduate school, the phrase of the day was, "God is dead." It was catchy, I'll say that for it, although it was quite a job to tease out just what those who uttered it really meant by it. But let me be personal at this point. For me, God, at least the God of the Bible, was dead and is dead. With the poet Robert W. Service, I lost my hope of heaven. Having done so, what is there for me and for the many who share my assumption that dead is dead, that dead is forever? Let me digress for a moment. I listen to a lot of evangelical preachers in the middle of the night because I suffer from insanity. Actually, I suffer from insomnia, but some people say I suffer from insanity. And at the end of each sermon, there's always the altar call. And it was phrased so perfectly, I thought. the other night. It said, "Decide to believe," was the phrase that the preacher used. And this is a kind of apology or excuse for me. I do not experience my lack of belief as a decision. Belief to me is something you discover, not something you decide on. So, with Martin Luther, I guess, I say, "God help me, here I stand, I can do no other." This is what I think. This is how I live my life. This is my assumption, that death is death and death is forever. Well, I can and do offer what humanistic Chinese sages for millennia have offered, historical immortality. As the Tao Te Ching puts it, to die and yet be remembered, that is immortality. We see this all the time, from the pyramids of Egypt to the buildings on college campuses named after big donors, and even occasionally after professors. For me, it is a small notice in a library card catalog or copies of books and articles on increasingly dusty shelves. I can also offer what might be called institutional immortality. This is not personal persistence through time. Rather, insofar as one is a part of an institution, a corporation perhaps, or a church, one contributes to its life, and that contribution lives on as long as the institution itself persists. This is part of why I belong to Cedars, and in a sense, why Cedars belongs to me. I was not a part of this group when it formed, and I will not be among you much longer. But as I hope, Cedars will be a part of the ongoing life of this place for a long time to come. To be a part of something larger, more important, and long-lasting than oneself is, it seems to me, a fundamental human need. But there is more, and from what may be an unexpected place. I offer what I call evolutionary immortality. For a little bit of review, we know the phrase survival of the fittest. By that is meant that so long as there is genetic variety in a population of biological entities, some will be more and some less suited to the particular environment in which they find themselves. And because of this differential fitness, the offspring of the especially fit ones will be more numerous in the cohort of future generations, and so on. This is the somewhat scrubbed up version. The brutal truth is that the primary mechanism by which Darwinian evolution proceeds, the one thing that makes all this go, is death. Without death, the development of new species cannot happen, or can happen only extremely slowly. Many must die that others might live, might become ever better fitted to their environment. And when the environment changes, as perhaps when an ice age happens, it often is that who is fittest might suddenly change. It's a messy business. Nature is messy. Many must die. A number of myths show us that our ancestors, many thousands of years, although they knew nothing of genetics or Darwinism, nonetheless figured out something similar themselves. The formula is, from death comes life. Although animal sacrifice is a complex phenomenon, an important part of its meaning is that by killing an animal, more abundant life can be obtained. The most graphic expression of this idea I know of comes from a group of islands of the present country of Indonesia, the Celebes Islands. There they cultivated tubers, and they also raised pigs. As you know, tubers primarily are propagated by cutting up a mature specimen, as with the potato, making sure you have one of the eyes. That you plant, and with a bit of luck, next year you have more tubers. The people of these islands had a myth of a goddess who was murdered in primordial times. Her body was dismembered and buried, and from the grave there arose not only tubers, but all kinds of useful items. things upon which life currently depended. In celebration, every year the people sacrifice a pig. It seems obviously a substitute for a human, as for a goddess stand-in, to have a feast and commemorate that primordial murder to ensure that the good things return each year. Many more examples could be presented, but the message is clear, that in some sense from death comes life. This is how nature works. It is some consolation to know that you, we, all of us, are a part of a great cycle of life and death, a cycle that stretches from the simplest one-celled bacteria to dolphins and horses and us, a herky-jerky one step back and two steps forward process, moving from simple to more complex life forms. It is an awesome drama of grandeur and even nobility, and the more we focus on the big picture, the more our individual selves and our little problems seem to shrink in importance. But, you say, there is a catch. Of course there is. Human beings are capable of love. Indeed, without love, our species would have died out many thousands of years ago. Love leads to personal loyalty, which in turn is the glue that holds human groups together. Problem is, we don't love the species, not even our own species. We love individuals. Like you, I don't love the constituents of an individual. I love the particular, the unique pattern formed by the constituents that make you, you. There's a deep mystery here because what I love is there when a loved one is alive and gone when she or he is dead. Yet all the parts seemingly remain. All the constituents of this compound being, at least the physical parts. The great majority of Christians, Muslims, and Hindus, as well as many unaffiliated people, of course, believe in an additional part, an immortal soul. That, they would say, is what departs at death. For me and those who, like me, are unable to believe in the continuation of personality and memory and consciousness after death, the mystery remains. As one haiku poet put it, we may be but shapes, only arrangements of things, but still, I love you. That is the great tragedy of human existence. It is not death itself. Death is but a fact. The tragedy is not that we are mortal, but that we love what is mortal. As Mary Oliver said it so well, to live in this world, you must be able to do three things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go. And when death comes, what happens to that love? It doesn't disappear, at least not immediately. It stays, even though it is and will always be alloyed with grief. But it stays. Thus a bit of you stays in me and I in you. And know this, death is the price of life, and grief is the price of love. May it be so.
Alan, you want to join me? Alan, can you join me to extinguish and give your benediction?
I'm sorry, I didn't. I was preoccupied.
Okay. Please repeat after me as I extinguish the flame of our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
The warmth of community or the fire of commitment.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. To live in this world, we must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. And when death comes, what happens to love? It doesn't disappear. It stays. Though it will always be alloyed with grief, but it stays. As long as you stay, as long as anyone stays. Notice that this poem is although it's about loss, it begins with love. It begins with love, to love what is mortal. Martin Luther once advised his flock to sin bravely because they could not but sin. I say love bravely because you cannot but love. Amen.